Okay, good evening. Um, Welcome to Spelman College, or thanks for being here. For those who are part of Spelman College already, this is a really special evening, and we are so thrilled to have our partners from the Brookings Institution. And for me, it's really a special joy. I am a board member of Brookings Institution, as well as I'm the president of Spelman College. So it's wonderful to have this come together like this. And it's great to see all of those who are here in the audience. We also know that there's like, I don't know, somebody told me 900 people who have signed up virtually. So there is a large audience who is here to either here in this room or virtually to listen to what I know is going to be a wonderful dialogue. It's such an honor to have the president of Brookings Institution, Dr. Rouse, who is here with us. And I particularly take a lot of pride because I was on the search committee that brought her to Brookings. It was no contest, it wasn't a question. She, was just the right person. But I took particular pride because this is the first time in Brookings, 100, how many years? Lots of years. Over 100-year history, first ever woman, first ever person of color, first Black woman. So it is wonderful. And I go to board meetings and have such pride when I see Cece and all that she brings to that role. And many know that she has had an incredible career in government, in academia at Princeton, at their School of Public Policy. So anyway, it's wonderful. And Alondra Nelson, who will also be in conversation, one of my real sheroes, who has been a real pioneer in the whole area of STEM broadly, women in STEM, people of color, so many things. But anyway, you're going to hear so much more from all of them. So I'm just here to welcome everybody and to say how wonderful it is to have Spelman, this institution, this unique institution that was created 143 years ago to serve the needs of women of African descent, back at a time when just after it was illegal for us to learn to read and write, and Spelman has continued to hold that banner. We are consistently rated the #1 HBCU. Tomorrow the ratings come out and we'll find out if we kept our ratings, but we are so proud of all that we do, and we're thrilled that we have some of our students here with us tonight. It means so much to have our students. And this is also special because as part of our new strategic plan, and we've just laid out a new strategic plan, we have put this issue of public policy, democracy, and the role of technology as a high priority. And we are very fortunate that in the $100 million gift that many people heard about, this historic gift earlier this year, some of those dollars go for an endowed professorship in public policy. So we are really thrilled to be able to build on that and to really think about how our voices as women of African descent that have often been left out of the public policy arena, how do our voices figure into these important conversations about democracy, public policy, and the role of technology, again, that we have been so left out of, and how do we take those things and really think about the integration of those. So I'm just so thrilled to be able to be here, and I just want to thank so many of my staff who have helped to pull this together, so many of the Brookings staff, some of whom have just met tonight for the first time, but they feel like they've been living together for the last 6 to 9 months. It's wonderful. So thank you so much. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Cynthia Spence, who associate professor of sociology, but probably most notably known as the founding director of our social justice program. We kind of are joined at the hip doing so many things together. So Cynthia, who has really been the driver behind pulling this together, thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gayle. And let's give Dr. Gayle, our amazing president, another round of applause. She brings so many gifts to Spelman, and certainly her varied associations across the country and the world in ways that help to enhance the programming that we do here at Spelman. Certainly Brookings knew about Spelman, but they really know about Spelman through Dr. Helene Gayle. And so we just want to applaud her and thank her so much for the work that she's doing. I also just want to thank also the Brookings team. We've been working on this project for some time, and now it's come to be. And I was called in to be, to work with others here on campus to help plan this event, because we've been talking about how to better educate our students about why we vote. We don't talk about who you should vote for, but we want our students to understand why we vote. And so certainly the work that Brookings is doing all over the country around issues that we will face in the 24 election, I want to commend you all and thank you for wanting to share this particular programming with Spelman College. You know that the title of our symposium is The Promises and Perils of AI. And in preparing for tonight's event, I just went on Brookings' site, and students who are here, you can always go to Brookings for any kind of research, and particularly around public policy, and certainly our students know that. But I wanted to see what Brookings has been thinking about around artificial intelligence, around AI. And I ran across because I'm short, right? I ran across a report that was issued actually in 2018, pre-pandemic, because I don't know about you all, we think about pre and post-pandemic now when we're trying to kind of give some temporality to issues. But on April 24 of 2018, a report from Brookings came from Darrell M. West and John R. Allen, and the title was How Artificial Intelligence is Transforming the World. And at that time, they said artificial intelligence is a wide-ranging tool that enables people to rethink how we integrate information, analyze data, and use the resulting insights to improve decision-making. And already it is transforming every walk of life. And in this report, and certainly I'm not going to bore you with the entire report, I found it quite interesting, however, but they made several recommendations. One, encourage greater data access for researchers without compromising users' personal privacy. Two, invest more government funding in unclassified AI research. Three, promote new models of digital education and AI workforce development so employees have the skills needed in the 21st century economy. Four, create a federal AI advisory committee to make policy recommendations. Six, engage with state and local officials so they enact effective policies. Seven, regulate broad AI principles rather than specific algorithms. 8, take bias complaints seriously so AI does not replicate historic injustice, unfairness, or discrimination in data or algorithms. Maintain mechanisms for human oversight and control. And lastly, penalize malicious AI behavior and promote cybersecurity. As we think about those recommendations, we know that this evening as well as tomorrow, many of these recommendations will in fact be dealt with in terms of the information that will be shared with you. The only recommendation that they did not include, but obviously the current Brookings team understands, is that you must in fact share this information at a site like the #1 historically Black college for women. So you must conduct an AI symposium at a place like Spelman College. And so again, tonight as well as tomorrow, we're here to really learn from the experts, and we're so happy to have so many of you here joining us as we think about AI and the future and the perils and the possibilities of AI as we begin to navigate this world that many have been working on for many of a year. And so without any further ado, I want to bring my colleague up, Spelman alumna, Dr. Pamela Scott Johnson, who serves as our provost for Spelman College, and she will then direct us as we proceed with the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you, audience, for being here. Thank you, Brookings team, for partnering with us. And it is good to actually see you in person. One of many of the recommendations that Cynthia talked about is centered around policy. And I have to tell you, when I was given this assignment, aside from working on the committee, I was really kind of overjoyed. Now, it's not often that a provost gets to be a fangirl or kind of act like a fan or superstar or stalker. But in an academic world, you know, I really am quite pleased and gratified and honored to introduce our two guests. First, we have Dr. Cecilia Rouse. Dr. Rouse is the president of the Brookings Institution. From 2021 to 2023, she served as the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the CEA, the first Black American to fill that role in the CBA's 100th or many long year history. That council is the agency within the Executive Office of the President charged with offering objective economic advice on the formulation of domestic and international policies. Confirmed with 95 votes in the U.S. Senate, she served as the CEA's chair while on public service leave from Princeton University, where she joined the faculty in 1992. While at Princeton, she also served as dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs from 2012 to 2021. She is the University Katzmann-Ernst Professor of Economics and Education and a Professor of Economics and Public Policy. Dr. Rouse is a labor economist with a focus on the economics of education. She is the founding director of the Princeton Education Research Section and a member of the American Philosophical Society, the National Academy of Education, the National Academy of Sciences. She served as senior editor for The Future of Children, a policy journal published by Princeton and the Brookings Institution, co-editor of the Journal of Labor Economics and the editorial board of the American Economic Journal, Economic Policy, and other journals. She previously served on boards of the Council of Foreign Relations, in MDRC, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the University of Rhode Island, and was an independent director of the T. Rowe Price Funds. Dr. Rouse's time as the CEA chair was her third term in the White House tour of duty. She served as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors from 2009 to 2011 and as special assistant to the president of the National Economic Council from 1998 to 1999. She earned her doctoral degree in economics and her bachelor's degree from Harvard University. Dr. Cecilia Rouse. Our next panelist is Dr. Alondra Nelson. Dr. Nelson holds the Harold F. Lindler Chair in the School of Social Sciences and leads the Science, Technology, and Social Values Lab at the Institute of Advanced Studies. From 2021 to 2023, she was Deputy Assistant to President Joseph Biden and Acting Director and Principal Deputy Director for Science and Society of the White House's OSTP. Dr. Nelson was the first person to serve in the latter role and which brought social science expertise explicitly into the work of federal science and technology strategy and policy. She led the development of the White House Blueprint for AI Bill of Rights, a cornerstone of President Biden's executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. In recognition of Dr. Nelson's impact on her OSTP tenure, Nature named her to its global list of 10 people who shaped science. In 2023, she was included in the inaugural Times 100 list of the most influential people in AI and was nominated by the White House and then appointed by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres to serve on the UN high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence. Dr. Nelson previously served on the faculty of Columbia University, where she was the first dean of social science and professor of sociology. She was formerly the 14th president and the CEO of the Social Science Research Council, an independent international nonprofit organization developing innovative programs that brought foundational research to bear on key social challenges. She began her academic career on the faculty of Yale University, where she was recognized with the Pourvu Award for interdisciplinary teaching excellence. Her research offers a critical and innovative approach to the social sciences in fruitful dialogues with other disciplines. Nelson's major research contributions are situated at the intersection of racial formation and social citizenship on the one hand, and emerging scientific and technological phenomena on the other. She connects these dimensions in award-winning and academic books, including The Social Life of DNA, Race, Reparations, and Reconciliation After the Genome, Body and Soul, the Black Panther Party and the Fight Against Medical Discrimination, Genetics and the Unsettled Past, the Collision of DNA, Race, and History, and with Keith Walu and Catherine Lee, and Technicolor, Race, Technology, and Everyday Life. Dr. Nelson has been elected to membership in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Academy of Political and Social Science, the American Association of the Advancement of Science, the American Philosophical Society, the Council of Foreign Relations, and the National Academy of Medicine. Raised in Southern California, she received a Bachelor's of Arts in Anthropology from the University of California, San Diego, where she was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and she earned her PhD in American Studies from New York University. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to bring to the stage Dr. Cecilia Rouse, President of the Brookings Institute, and Dr. Alondra Nelson, architect of the Blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. Thank you. Oh, I'm a hugger.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's really nice to be here. It's especially nice to have Alondra here with us this evening, because as Dr. Scott Johnson described, she's a badass when it comes to AI.
Takes one to know one.
So, look, we're going to talk about AI, but let's start with artificial intelligence in the heat of the moment. Then we'll work backwards, talk a little bit about our time in the White House, which was a lot of fun, and then delve a little bit more into your career. But there's a lot to get to, so let's do it. All right, so this year we've seen elections in India, Pakistan, Indonesia, the UK, the European Union, and a host of other countries. I think the estimate is about 50% of the world is voting this year. And we've got something gearing up here in the United States as well. And many people are concerned about the impact of AI on democracy. Can you describe to us in what ways AI can be impacting democracy?
Yeah, for sure. First, let me thank President Gayle for having us and for this wonderful partnership with President Rouse. And thank you, Provost Scott Johnson, for that wonderful introduction, and also Dr. Spence. Wonderful to see you all. The last time I was at Spelman, it's always great to be here, I think was an event around President Gayle's inauguration around women in the STEM field. So it's great to be back. So this is, we're calling this our AI election, our big AI election year, our first kind of AI election year, in part because, as you suggest, we have, many of the world's major democracies, Indonesia, India, the United States, the EU, having major elections. But it's also the first election since the introduction of generative AI, the first big kind of election where you're electing prime ministers, presidents, parliaments, and the like. So, we have a big question looming overhead, which is sort of precisely as the banner says behind us, what are the stakes for democracy? What are the stakes for elections? And on the one hand, I think we could anticipate that we know that there's been foreign interference in the elections in 2016 and 2020. So I think nothing could have changed, and we could anticipate that would happen again. But we also know we have this powerful new technology. AI has been with us for a long time, and AI effectively is, input into a machine-based system that outputs, that makes inferences, and these inferences then generate outputs, and the outputs are things that we call predictions, which aren't quite predictions, otherwise we'd have no uncertainty in life, or recommendations, like your recommendation system, like when you're using Netflix, or increasingly generative content, so text, images, video, voice, and the like. So that's AI in a nutshell. It's statistics, it's math, it's hardware, it's software. It is not magic. But what it does do is take things, it's powerful technology, particularly generative AI, that can lower the threshold to entry. So if somebody wants to do hijinks in an election, want to do shenanigans in an election, it's pretty easy. You don't have to have a lot of technical expertise now that you have these kind of easy-to-use consumer-facing products. And it allows this work to be done at scale. So we know, for example, that there's been reports that both Iran and China have been using generative AI to communicate more effectively and persuasively. So if you have people for whom English is not their first language, and they're trying to, sort of influence campaigns or have political, persuasion in the social space, if they can get better at persuading people with better English, or using slang in the right way and these sorts of things, then that's helpful for the kinds of aims that foreign malign actors might have around our elections. So that's the kind of general context. I think we can say we've seen a couple of things, I think, that we didn't anticipate. So I think the big worry, which we haven't quite seen, but we still got a few months to go in 2024, is that there was going to be massive kind of election interference on a scale that we hadn't known in prior elections. But we have seen things that have been a little bit that we didn't anticipate. So you mentioned Pakistan. In the Pakistan election, Imran Khan, who was the former prime minister, who's now incarcerated, who's in jail, his political party used a voice clone and an image clone of him to campaign. So I think when we were thinking about what's AI going to mean for the election, we weren't really thinking about that particular use case, at least I wasn't. So we're seeing kind of use cases that we didn't anticipate. We're seeing things I think we did worry about, like obviously there was the New Hampshire Democratic primary robocall that used President Biden's voice, I think it's alleged to have used 11 Labs, which is a free voice cloning AI software that you can use. And we've also seen deepfakes. So we've seen deepfakes of Taylor Swift, endorsing President Trump. We've seen deepfakes of Vice President Harris amplified by Elon Musk, with her saying things she didn't say. So all of those things are happening. And a lot of that is in the space of disinformation. So that's deliberate attempts to shape elections, to shape election outcomes. What I want to raise to the conversation that we should think about, which I think is the bigger issue for democracy. So if we think about democracy in the sense that we as social scientists think about it, we're thinking about institutions, we're thinking about social cohesion, and not just these one-off actions. And so that's all. So misinformation is also a worry. I did a study with the journalist Julia Angwin. We've started a project called the AI Democracy Projects, and we've been testing chatbots for the accuracy, harmfulness of the information that they output. So we built some proprietary software that will take down answers simultaneously from 5 chatbots to 1 question. So you can say, is there an election, polling site and zip code 08540, which is your former zip code in Princeton. And we can compare the answers that Gemini provides, that Llama 3 provides, that GPT-4 provides, et cetera, Mistral, which is a French company, and look at them for accuracy. So what we did in this study is we brought together bipartisan election officials. So we had the Secretary of State of Nevada, Cisco Aguilar. We had an election commissioner from Philadelphia, a Republican. We had a Republican colleague from Maricopa County, Arizona. As you've been tracking, has had a lot of challenges with their elections. And what they found and what they saw in the testing of these chatbots was alarming to them. So the information that would be output, and some of the questions we posed were about polling locations. We posed questions about voting modality. Can you vote by text? Can you vote by SMS was one of the questions. We posed questions about voting eligibility. So in the state of Nevada, if you have a felony conviction, can you vote? So all of the answers, if you've interacted with these chatbots, were totally plausible. So if you or I looked at them, they looked totally plausible. But if you're the Secretary of State of Nevada, and you know what the law is around felony convictions and that people should be able to vote immediately, or if you know that you can vote nowhere in the United States by text message, although some of the chatbots told us in answers that you could. So I think that's an equally big challenge for not only for elections, but for democracy, because it is creating this kind of erosion of truth and this kind of erosion of our trust in information that we already have, I think, arguably a kind of crisis around. And so I think that's also at stake in this election, in ways that are as profound as our concerns about China and Iran.
Okay, I'll crawl back into my anxiety closet. So what are ways that we can adapt as individuals, as in the public sector? Can we adapt, and relatively quickly, to equip ourselves to avoid these kinds of challenges? And what might the tech companies be doing to help address these kinds of challenges as well?
So what we heard from the election officials was, one of the things they say around elections is like paper ballots are our best friend, right? They're more reliable, and the advice around what to do around these challenges around mis and disinformation with election information was kind of similar. They were like, go to our website, call your election office, if you're going to use advice from somebody on social media or a website that's unfamiliar to you. Can it be a degree of separation from somebody that you know? Like, are there trusted networks, people from church, people from school that you trust, that increase your degree of trust that you might have in a particular site? So kind of old school ways of getting information about elections was certainly one thing that was recommended. The companies have been mixed. After we did this study, which was released in February, prior to us releasing the study, many of the leading AI companies had already said that if someone was going to pose a question to one of their chatbot interfaces about elections, they were going to point them to, state election sites or city or county election sites. And in a couple of instances, we found that the URL that was supposed to be pointing to a site was like a URL that didn't exist. So we had to have fact checkers to actually check the URLs to make sure. And they sounded plausible, like wherecanIvote.org. You think that's probably a site, but it is not. It was hallucinated. But I think the companies have some. They've at least made a lot of noise around trying to point people to reliable election information. But we still, I think, we said this a lot in Washington, we need Congress to act, right? So there's been confusion around what is the role of the Federal Elections Commission, what is the, of existing regulatory agencies, do they have purview in these particular places, purview over AI? So we're kind of waiting for that to sort of settle. And I think in the meantime, to your question, we just have to be more adaptive. So, the generative AI, particularly images and deepfakes, are getting much better. Occasionally you're gonna see, we've got the famous viral image of the Balenciaga Pope, the Pope wearing the white puffy Balenciaga puffy coat. And if you look closely, I think he's got 6 fingers and his eyes are blurred. And, and you will have seen, generative AI images of cats with 6 legs and, the kind of digits and limbs we don't quite get right, but it's getting much better, much sooner. And on the one hand, I think we have learned to be skeptical around news sites and memes, and I think we will kind of learn and adapt. But on the other hand, you can't possibly know, and it creates this kind of, what we call the liar's dividend in the social sciences, which is this kind of looming uncertainty that contributes to a kind of a lack of social cohesion, because you never quite know if the information that you're receiving is accurate or right. So there's lots of things we can do. It puts us much more, I think, I was talking to a young woman earlier this afternoon, a professor actually, who teaches cybersecurity, and it's a cybersecurity space where there's not a silver bullet to fix it, and there's a kind of, I think, kind of practice of kind of ever vigilance around it.
Well, you alluded to the fact that we need Congress. You alluded to the fact that our public officials are going to need to step in. So let's go back to the time when you were one of those people. And so when we were...
You were too.
I was too. All right. So let's go back down to a little history here. So you left the White House in February of 2023, and you'd been acting as director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. For the prior year, you were the principal deputy director for Science and Society for the year prior. So among your many accomplishments in this role, you led the development of a document. It looks very little. If you've read it, it looks like it's a no-brainer, but this was a lot of work. And that document became the Biden-Harris administration's official stance on the issues, called the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came about, what's in it, and what did it lead to?
Well, thank you for signing off on it. I mean, I think people who haven't worked in Washington think that you just write something and you send it out. They don't know that thousands of people get to redline it and to
say
get
I don't
to say
think
no.
a the. I think you need an and here,
Yes.
not just a the.
But also, Cece could have said, we shouldn't put that out, and someone would have been like, oh no. So thank you. So what did we do? I mean, we came into the administration, as day one folks, and there was already, I think, in public conversation, a lot of concern about, this is before generative AI, about algorithmic bias, about algorithmic discrimination. Some pretty important books, for example, come out in 2018, 2019. So Virginia Eubanks's Automating Inequality, Sophia Noble's Algorithm of Oppression. So we're having already this kind of larger public conversation about the use of algorithms, particularly for consequential decisions in people's lives. And so, certainly we were wanting to be responsive, I think, to that conversation and those concerns. And we were also coming into office in the midst of a pandemic. And so it felt like there was a time where we had to think about how do you do any policymaking, and how do you do science and technology policymaking at a time when people don't trust vaccines, they, waning trust in science, don't trust government? Is there a way to begin to signal that we're doing science and technology policy in a different way? And what became the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights was and one of the ways that we tried to do this. So we wrote an op-ed in Wired in which we announced that we were beginning a kind of policy conversation. It was a call to action or a call to response to the American public. It included an email address to the White House, so you could write to the White House, and we were asking people what they thought. How should the federal government be approaching issues of AI and people's rights and people's privacy? What things were people concerned about? We had a series of workshops and panels and lots of conversation, I think including doing one with Brookings. I'm looking at Nicol Turner-Lee here, who hosted that for one of our sort of White House engagements. And we also took a page from the FDA, which we had these 2-minute listening sessions. So FDA hearings, you get a 2-minute timer and you can sort of speak your piece. And we did that as well. So we took in a lot of input, not only from leading AI researchers, both in academia and industry, not only from people in government who had equities in this space, but also from the broad general public. So we literally talked to rabbis and priests, we talked to high school students, we talked to lots of different people. And what the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights does is distill those conversations. It has no aspirations for novelty. It was really a distillation of some of the best practices we knew. So the 5 principles of the AI Bill of Rights are that AI systems should be safe and effective, that they should be free, you should be protected from algorithmic discriminations, you should have data privacy, you should know when AI is being used, and you should have some kind of fallback if it is being used. And for each of those, we were able to show the beginnings of kind of green shoots of what you might do. So how do you demonstrate that systems are safe and effective? You do pre-deployment testing of the systems, right? Or after they're deployed, you do red teaming and risk assessment. So these are things that you're all starting to hear because we're beginning to build out a bit more muscle as a society in how to do these things around AI and black box systems. And it also had a kind of theory of the case, one of which was that there were things that government could do now to the extent that there are risks associated with the uses of AI, that government could sort of move now, be a first mover in doing that. So that's what we did, and what we ended up with was also a document that we wanted to, the subtitle is, I think, something like ensuring that automated systems are safe for the American public or something. So it's addressed to the public. It's not a policy document that we created addressed to us. And so the language of it is like very plainly stated. It's been used in Massachusetts middle school curriculum. It's been taught at the Harvard Business School. Like, it's intended to be a living document that's circulated. And so we've been very pleased that happened. And then it becomes, as you said, an important document for the year that followed. So the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights comes out in October of 2022. The world tilts on its axis in November of 2022 when ChatGPT is introduced, right? So we were ready. We had thought about it. We had spent almost a year thinking about it in the administration and really putting down some flags about people's rights and their privacy vis-a-vis the use of AI tools and systems.
I was just going to go there. Whoa, see, look, there go my cards. I was just going to ask you how the introduction of ChatGPT impacted your work, but maybe we'll move on to, there have been many attempts at legislation around AI. Why have we not made more progress? And can you...
Deep sigh, hashtag deep sigh.
Hashtag deep sigh, got it.
Lots to say. First of all, initially it was a very kind of niche policy topic. So people just weren't interested, and I think it was hard to get momentum around it. So there were a few kind of stalwart, diehard legislators, Senator Bennett, Senator Markey, Senator Klobuchar, Representative Clark, Senator Booker, who had for years, since 2018, 2019, had smart, reasonable AI legislation that they had proposed. But because we hadn't had a moment that made it a topic that was just, as somebody who works in the space of emerging science and technology, when I talk to people in my, non-wonk, non-nerd networks about AI, they were just like, no one wants to talk about this. But if you'll remember that Christmas of 2022, everybody wanted to talk about, or Hanukkah, everyone wanted to talk about AI. It became a really important topic. So I think it felt very niche in some ways, as opposed to, as you're seeing now, and I think we all have quickly sort of pivoted to this is actually the infrastructure for it all, right? This is the infrastructure for commerce. It's the infrastructure for how we're going to do government services. It's the infrastructure for how we communicate. It's the infrastructure for industry. I mean, it is a whole new kind of technological, socio-technological ecosystem that's being built. And so it is not niche. It actually sits really in the middle of every kind of domestic international policy issue. So I think that we've had a moment of urgency, so there's been a bit more energy and activity around this. But we have a polarized Congress, and we can't, I think it's not only AI, it's sort of any policy issue you raise, it's the similar kind of challenge. And it's been, I think we had a lot of momentum, and then I think we lost some of it, actually. So instead of saying, Senator Booker and Representative Clark had partnered, and Klobuchar partnered on an amazing bill on AI privacy. How do we need to think about that in the context of generative AI, and how do we freshen it up to make sure it's ready for this moment and get it out the door? What we heard both on the House and the Senate side was, well, let's, get everybody on the same page, and let's not be rash, and let's not, move too quickly. And I think all of that is true. I mean, the Congress is not meant to be, I think even just as the framers, as it was designed, a fast-moving entity. But there was kind of existing things that they could have moved on. So I think it's been frustrating as people's attention goes elsewhere, that we might be losing that window of opportunity. I mean, I'm hoping in this Congress there's still a little moment. We had another resuscitation of the possibility of privacy legislation and data privacy legislation, particularly around young people. But we'll see what happens. And there's a group of bills that's coming out of the bipartisan process that Leader Schumer led. But it's not great on rights. It's not great on privacy. It's pretty good on innovation, but some of the innovation work is funding things that we should have already funded anyway. So, the CHIPS and Science Act is a tremendous accomplishment, one of the several of the Biden administration. Doesn't all of the money has been authorized, but not all has been appropriated. So part of what this sort of Schumer legislation would do would be to appropriate the rest of that funding, for example, which is great, and we need it, particularly because a lot of it comes to tribal colleges and universities. Historically, Black colleges and universities are investments in that as well. So it's a long-winded answer, but much to do.
There is much to do, and so this is a two-part, and then we'll move off of Congress, because
what would your answer be?
I don't know, because what I worry about is we're going to look back one day, my colleagues have pointed out that we look back now and think we should have done more with social media. And are we going to look back and say we should have done more when it came to putting guardrails around AI? And yet, here's my real question to you, because I'm curious what the answer is, what you think, is the tech companies argue, but we don't want to stifle innovation. Yeah. Do you think that is an actual trade-off, or do you think that there are things that guardrails we can put in place that would help, minimize some of the more harmful and potential impacts of AI, while nonetheless allowing for innovation? Because look, it's here, and we can all benefit from it.
I mean, yes, of course. I mean, I just think that's ridiculous on its face. The fact that you can only have innovation or, have guardrails. Of course, you can have both. And we have historical examples. We have things like, the Clean Air Act that, requires that we put, filters on our car mufflers so we're not polluting. So there are forms of carburetor is a bit of technological innovation. There are types, so there are forms of regulation and guardrails that actually force us to innovate in science and technology to kind of meet that bar. So it's why we have cleaner air, it's why we have cleaner water, it's why we have seatbelts, and so there's a whole history of legislation. So lots of folks might not agree with those and think, some of the Clean Water and Water and Air Acts went too far. But the fact is that they didn't stifle innovation, for example, in those cases. And the companies themselves will say, that what they're trying to do is I mean, this is your world. They're trying to reduce uncertainty.
Yeah,
And so they don't, so obviously they don't want stringent regulation, even though many have asked, including Sam Altman in Congress, asked for regulation. But they also don't want to be living in a world in which a new regulation might come or might be pulled away or it might change, and so they don't actually know the rules of the road on which they're doing their work. And then fundamentally, I think for me, if you truly believe in innovation, I actually believe that we can create responsible AI tools and systems, that we have the capacity, and particularly in the United States, the country that is really leading the world in the development of these tools and systems, to do it in a way that sort of manages these trade-offs. I think it's infinitely doable, and we should expect nothing less.
Okay, I said it was the last policy question, but I have one more. We have an election. We have a debate tomorrow.
Yes.
Do you have thoughts about what we would expect from a Harris administration in terms of AI policy and what we might expect from a Trump administration?
Sure. I mean, the platform has said it. So the RNC platform said that what they're going to do, the only thing it said about what they're going to do about AI is to rescind President Biden's executive order on AI. This comprehensive, extraordinary piece of executive action in the face of Congress being able to act and not being able to act, that provides upskilling for workers, that is trying to help us figure out what we should do about liability and copyright regimes as these things are changing with generative AI, that creates through the Office of Management and Budget policies and procedures for how government uses and will procure AI, and insists that it be both rights preserving and privacy preserving. So this is extraordinary work. The OMB memo, for example, if we think about the huge procurement that the United States government is about to make in investments in AI, that is a market shaper. Again, this is your world. I'm just saying words, but you can actually explain what this means. But that's the ability to the companies want these contracts, and these are contracts that endure. I mean, and so it's a real opportunity to bake in to, our procurement decisions around AI, that they be rights preserving if the government's going to do it, that they preserve people's privacy in particular sorts of ways. So in a Trump administration, all of that goes away. I mean, it's just we're just going to rescind this entire document, which also has innovation support, how to improve government services through innovation, and really important national security measures sort of all goes away, and so, that's a problem. With Vice President Harris, I mean, she has been actually quite a leader in the administration's AI policy, so she did a really amazing speech in November of 2023 on the eve of the UK AI Safety Summit at the US Embassy in London, in which she kind of laid out the Biden-Harris administration's approach to AI and how it was both about mitigating near-term current risks and harms, long-term risks and harms, and also driving innovation, right? It is a kind of very balanced, comprehensive approach, and so I think you could expect her to continue to advance that.
Okay, so if we think about the real promise of AI, and suppose that we're able to govern AI tools effectively, what does that promise look like? And conversely, what might failure look like, and where do you see the challenges ahead?
So one of the things I always love to say about, people will invoke AI for good, and the sort of reason that we're having these debates and trying to figure out the guardrails is because that's the sort of, true north or whatever that we're trying to get to. I would only just say that AI for good, quote unquote, is not an inherent characteristic of the technology. So there's nothing about the technology itself that's going to get us those outcomes that we want. We've got to steward and make those outcomes, and partly how we do that is through policy, is through guardrails, is through law. And so, that said, I think some of the things that are really promising are around science. So we will have seen Google DeepMind has done amazing work on protein folding, so AlphaFold and now AlphaFold 3, which came out, I think, in March of this year, that paper. So the potential there to understand just discovery about how things are put together in the world. Potentially people point to the potential for new kinds of drug therapies and diagnostics. That's amazing. We're already seeing uses of AI, and not all of this is about generative AI, but for translation. So I think the expansion of just our ability to communicate with each other, expanding that to many more dialects, many more languages. There's accessibility uses for AI, for people, for mobility, that are pretty extraordinary. So those are the good things. There's people will say things like it's going to cure cancer and all of that. So I don't know if any of that's true, but all of that will take investment. It will take, we've got, again, I feel like I'm like an armchair economist. We've got market failure, CC, around, like I'm really saying these things here, and you're just like, ugh. I'll leave the real economist to explain it. But, a lot of these things, they're not the market there that we would want to incentivize businesses to build them out. So it might fall to government, or, programs like ARPA-H, which is an ARPA for healthcare that's supposed to kind of stimulate innovation in a market so you can get it to a place where someone might take it up and move it forward. So there are lots of, those are all potentials. I think the failure, we have the same challenge. If we do nothing, we neither get the good nor when we get the failure, is probably more likely. And so, but the challenges are profound, right? I mean, some of the things we began with around the erosion of social cohesion, right? The total erosion of trust and truth, and the kind of ground truth that we base kind of societies on, for example. Obviously, we have tremendous challenges. I know there's 2 panels going on tomorrow that will take up some of this with issues of discrimination. We've got, facial recognition technology systems that are used in the criminal legal system that disproportionately negatively impact people of color. We've, in a municipality like Detroit, we've had 6 people wrongly arrested using facial recognition technology, for example. So there are challenges around, biased data sets and privacy issues. Who controls data, who owns data. There's a lot that we still need to sort of figure out that I think, that we've got to think about. And then I also think, this is not going to be the only fast-moving technology that's coming. We sit in a world in which disruption is, a pretty important business model for how people do business. And the disruption business model is a model. The raison d'etre, the reason behind it, is to skirt the law and skirt regulation. So when you're disrupting a market, you're just like, how do I get around the thing? And so that means that we're always going to be in a space of trying to figure out resilience and adaptation, and both in society and also in how we think about legislation and governance. So a lot's coming. I mean, if we pull off fusion, if we pull off quantum computing, we're going to have to, figure out how to govern in a kind of iterative, dynamic space pretty quickly.
There are so many questions. We'll be talking tomorrow, but I was reading about my colleague Molly Kinder's work on the screenwriters strike. And so one of the things the screenwriters achieved was that AI could not be an author, but that pushes into what's the definition of a human? And so there are philosophical questions that we have to nail down as we get to the generative part of AI as well. I mean, there's just a host of
But one thing on those, the Screenwriters Guild strike and the Writers Guild strike that I love is that what that ChatGPT moment did is sort of, I think, awaken a public. It was I'm going to use another nerdy social science word. It opened up a new political opportunity structure.
There you go. We close one door,
I'm
we
at a
open
college,
another.
right, yes.
There's still jobs.
Yes, you can still be a sociologist. So, which is to say that, it engaged the public in a political conversation about the stakes of these technologies and what we should do with them. And what I love about these strikes, in part because they happen so early, is that they gave the lie to people who say, if you don't have a PhD in computer science, you shouldn't have anything to say about AI in the policy space, right? So these were people who, probably many of them English majors, who were just like, we're English majors, but we're very clear about what the stakes of what these technologies mean for our work. And such that we're going to make these demands in these contracts, which I think is tremendously, important, because all of us need to, I think, get more involved and feel more empowered in the stakes of these technologies for the elections and more.
The Innovation Lab, right? That's a lot of what the Innovation Lab here at Spelman is about as well. So that's, I think that's great. Okay, let's go back a little further. All right, so, and pick up some of your earlier threads in your career. So you wrote a book called The Social Life of DNA, Race, Reparations, and Reconciliation After the Genome. It was widely recognized, including by the Wall Street Journal, as a favorite book of 2016, and by the Writers' Trust of Canada as the best book of the year. So tell us a little bit about the book.
So the book is it's an ethnography. It's about the first about 10 years in a new startup industry. And the startup industry happened to be, at the time, direct-to-consumer genetic ancestry testing. I started doing this research in 2002, 2003, when the market had been introduced in the UK, but not so much in the US. This was 5 or 6 years before 23andMe, which was introduced in 2008. And it was just I was interested, why would people do this? Would the industry stick? This is a market, is this actually a thing that people are gonna do? Given my prior work that I had done, it was clear that many African Americans had a lot of misgivings about technology, scientific research, and the premise of these new technologies was that were being particularly marketed to African Americans because of the history of racial slavery and the particular yearnings and right struggles around identity and the history history of our families and our communities. How would you compel? What would be compelling to people such that they would put their DNA in a FedEx envelope and send it to a laboratory in Utah and expect that it could send it back to them and tell them who they were? Like, all of those questions, as an ethnographer, I was like, wow, 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 wow. And I spent time with just incredible people. I mean, the early adopters of this new startup, direct-to-consumer genetic company were African-American senior citizens, African-American elders who often had been conventional, traditional genealogists for many decades, and were interested in trying these new tools and technologies. So the book ends up being about repair and reparation in part because all of what I heard from people about why they would take these tests. So what was that, despite what might be dangerous for you or for your family about sending your DNA to a lab in Utah or, Atlanta or something to people you don't know and maybe don't trust, why would you do that? And it was because they were individually and collectively on these kind of profound journeys of discovery, and they thought that, and repair, and hoped that technology could be a vehicle to building bridges, to finding kin, to actual, in the case of one of the people I write about, Deidre Farmer Pailman, actual reparations, fiscal reparations through legal cases in the United States. So that was that book, and that book and my prior book, Body and Soul, both were about genetics in some ways, the social implications of genetics, and I come to AI through thinking about genetics and human genetics, and the Human Genome Project, which starts in 1990, 1991, is this project to map the human genome, but it also is this massive supercomputing project. So it uses Department of Energy computers because there's so much data. So the space of human genetics research has always been a kind of big data question, and so from there you're going to algorithms and AI because you need these kind of tools to be able to wrangle data sets that are this large.
So if you look up the term Afrofuturism on Wikipedia, yours is the second name listed. That's quite an honor. The term was coined by American cultural critic Mark Dury in 1993 and explored in the late 1990s through conversations led by you. Alondra Nelson. It's defined as a cultural aesthetic, philosophy of science, and history that explores the intersection of the African diaspora culture with science and technology. Tell us about that period of time leading those conversations.
God, you're like back in the crates, digging in the crates.
Yeah, exactly. We're digging.
Okay, so this is pre-Wakanda. This is the 90s. This is 30 years ago, 25 years ago. It was a long time
Just
ago.
yesterday.
It's just, yeah. I was a graduate student at NYU, and we used things in this ancient time called listservs, and we had online communities back in the day. And it was a moment, for me, Afrofuturism was this very generative kind of framework for thinking about, I think, the things that we felt were like weird or like just out, like, like sort of nerdy, and like who are these Black people who are interested in Star Trek and who are writing C++ and at night for fun, and like what's wrong with these people? And part of what the early internet allowed of the 90s was like you could find others like you. You're just like, oh, you do that too? Oh my God, let's like write white code together. And so that's partly what it was about, but it was also, I think, ultimately about the space of being able to have critique and hope around science and technology, that I think that the African American experience, so what I saw with these elders who were genealogists was a very clear-eyed understanding of the Tuskegee syphilis study, of World War, soldiers in World War II who'd been experimented on, of medical experimentation as a form of kind of exploitation and oppression that happened during plantation racial slavery in the United States and elsewhere. Very clear about that. And yet there is a hope that they could engage these new tools to sort of achieve goals and outcomes that they wanted. And so for me, Afrofuturism was also about that. It was like, not like, you think about a figure like Sun Ra, like, I don't have to accept the technology on your terms, but I'm into the technology. And I want to rethink what its implications are for myself and my community. So that's kind of how I ended up there. But it was very much about the early days of the internet and being able to find people as we did in New Zealand, and the Afrofuturism community, which was this, there were literally people from all over the world. And now you just take that for granted. But there was a moment where we were just like, oh my God, you also have read all of Octavia Butler, 25 times. There is a you like that. And for me, I think differently from the aesthetic, I think, movement of Afrofuturism, the technology piece has always been really, the science and technology piece, really germane.
Well, I have one more question for Alondra, but then I'm going to turn it over to you and ask questions of you, so start thinking of what you'd like to ask her. But I have one last question. So we've come now to the question that every student here, well, they may have other questions, but I'm sure this is one that they would like to ask as well. So how did you choose your path? What barriers have you faced and overcome? And what advice do you have for them?
Oh, boy. Nancy Pelosi always says, I don't give advice. It's probably not a bad thing to say. I just have amazing parents. I have amazing, parents who I think, like so many parents and so many Black parents say and mean it. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to say it and mean it. You can literally do anything you want to do. Like, my parents actually meant it, and then they would say, but you're a woman, and people might say, but there would always be like kind of a little bit asterisk, but they were like they sort of really meant that. And I grew up with a mother. My mother was a cryptographer before working on kind of big computer mainframes, and my dad was a machinist and a technician, and I kind of grew up a STEM kid in San Diego. We both grew up in San Diego. Your choices are STEM kid or surfer.
I think I tried surfing once.
And I think so to have a mother who just like did the science or whatever and was not like, she just did it, and she wasn't, I think she faced, obviously, tremendous barriers, but it wasn't a first order question for her in the way I think we had the luxury of having it as a first order question. So I think, STEM kid who discovered 4 fields anthropology, who discovered people in science, so at UCSD, where I went to college, 4 fields anthropology doesn't exist everywhere in the same way, but it is physical anthropology and it is archaeology together with social cultural anthropology and linguistics. And so you're studying geology and you're studying soil and acid in soil and soil levels, and you're also studying people and you're studying physiology and so it was this kind of amazing thing. So that's, I think, how kind of intellectually I end up in the space that I am. And I think for advice, I mean, I feel like that mentorship is so, so important. But I feel like you need a kind of like fantasy football team of mentors. You need more than one. You should never tie your wagon to the one person that you think is gonna, catapult you into the destiny you think you should have. And that, for me, mentorship has been so important. I mean, I remember being in graduate school and asking a mentor, what do I wear to a job interview? Like, you need to actually have someone you can ask that kind of question. How do I publish? What do I do? And I think there are different, there's lots of different types of mentors. They may have experiences that are utterly different from you. They may not look like you. They may be different in every way. I mean, my dissertation advisor is a Scot, is a kind of cultural theorist who's a Scotsman. So I think that's the advice. It would be just find a village of mentors. They're peer mentors, they're older mentors, they're very different from you. I think what they share in common is that they see for you more bravely than you can sort of possibilities for how you might approach different opportunities in life. And that's a really tremendous gift to be able to give someone.
I really like that. Well, thank you. Okay, so I'd now like to open the floor. We have 2 microphones here, so don't be shy. Oh, come on.
Spelman, they're not shy.
I know, right. So if you have a question, just so everyone can hear, just go over, yeah, you're right, they're not shy. Awesome. Okay, we'll go. Okay, we'll start on the right first, since you got there first.
Hi, my name is China Bill. I'm a sophomore sociology major from PG County, Maryland. And my question was, with the popularity of TikTok, do you think that there will be policies to ensure user safety and user privacy without fully banning the app? And I was wondering, is there anything that could be done about the misinformation going on? Like, I know on Twitter they have like flags that's like, this may be a misinformation, but I haven't noticed anything like that on TikTok. So that's my question.
That is a great question. The TikTok one is hard. There are, I think, legitimate national security concerns. It's not clear where the data of this platform that, tens of millions of Americans use every day goes. There are concerns about forms of, sentiment and persuasion, based on how the algorithm might be tuned. So I think those are legitimate concerns. I think on the flip side, we also have lots of other platforms that siphon up lots of data about Americans every day, and we also don't know where that data goes, and we don't just have the kinds of protections around data that we need in the United States at all. But I think it matters who owns TikTok. If some of what has been alleged is true, I haven't been in a top secret setting in a long time, so I'm not totally read into that. So I think it's a legitimate concern. I would say, we should take it seriously, but we also have a larger, broader problem with an ecosystem of data brokers and sort of the circulation of data that's been going unaddressed as well. And I'm sorry, China, what was the other part of your question? I forgot that part. The second part.
I was talking about the misinformation. So do you think there could be like some type of flag to say this might be misinformation? Because I was saying I noticed that on Twitter and other forms, social media.
Oh, like the community notes on Twitter, for example?
Yeah.
I think that's one thing we have to try. I mean, one could imagine, a kind of Wikipedia, which I think Community Notes is trying to do to work with that. There's also for synthetic content, there are attempts to use AI to sort of look to see if AI has been used, if there's been a kind of fingerprint that AI has been used in creating that. But I think fundamentally it is going to be more like I mentioned this kind of cybersecurity approach, which is that we just constantly have to be vigilant. We're never going to fix it or solve it. I would say that we do need legislation that makes it more consequential, that gives people consequences for deliberately creating misinformation or disinformation. And right now we don't have any consequences at all.
I was gonna say, do you think that the companies like that own TikTok, that own Twitter are at fault for not, being able to point out this misinformation and being more because they say stuff about like their algorithm, like do you think that they're more at fault, or is it just like up to the user?
Well, I'm going to be an armchair economist again, but I would love Cece's answer to this. I mean, what's the company's obligation? Their obligations to make money for their stakeholder.
Yeah.
And right, like is that their principle?
And there's, I think, the whole legal question of whether they're just curating content or whether they actually are more media companies.
Right.
We've got a whole group at Brookings that is studying this. I think it's what, Section 230.
Section 230. Yeah.
Right. So that's even just a legal question. The Supreme Court will be taking up a couple cases. Okay. Around that.
Supreme Court. Okay, I had one last question, and then I'm.
Okay, and then we got to share.
Yes, I will move. I'm sorry.
But I love Spelman because I love women that take up space. Like, it's Spelman, it's just like, I'm going to go to my fourth question.
Sorry. My last question was about genealogy. I really think that's really interesting. And I was watching, I think a documentary about, forensic science and what it has to do with, genealogy and 23andMe. And it was an interesting story. I think it was, a serial killer that was caught because one of his family members did a 23andMe. And do you think that that is ethical, or what are your thoughts about that?
That's never a good question, China. I'm so encouraged that you're a sociology major. The future is bright. Dr. Spence is very proud, yes. So it's a complicated question. I mean, on the one hand, if we can use these new tools, I mean, there's other cases. There's the Grim Sleeper case in California, this, a serial killer who had gone undetected for, I think, 3 decades, had killed scores of women. You want to use those tools. I think, genealogy used in the criminal justice space is just complicated because you're often doing kind of just these kind of dragnet cold cases. So you're just kind of throwing kind of matches against the wall to see what fits, see what hits. Differently from things like fingerprints, DNA data implicates your family and implicates families. And so, fingerprint is sort of you. But DNA data is always, will tell you something about, a bio mother and a bio father and maybe bio siblings. And so particularly for communities that are already over-policed and we know are disproportionately likely to be in a DNA database, the thing about this kind of testing is the match is because you're matching to a database that already exists. And what's already in that database often is the DNA of, Black and brown people that maybe shouldn't be there. I mean, I lived part of my life in New York City, and we know that, part of the sort of broad authorities that policing around gangs has, for example, is that they were, fairly freely, the police collecting DNA data from young people who, were alleged to have some sort of gang affiliation. Mm-hmm. So once that's in a database, it's just there, Yeah. So there are sort of bioethics issues, of course, but I think there are also issues about how these tools, even as they're doing often good and individual cases. In the course of solving that one case, how much other DNA has been trolled through, how many other people have been implicated. I mean, there's just a lot of complexity around that one.
Thank you.
Thanks, China.
Okay, so I've got 4 people lined up, so I'm going to ask you to limit your just to one question. We'll have a
All right.
reception afterwards, and
Okay.
well, no, you won't be here, but we can continue the conversation tonight and tomorrow.
Hello, my name is Rihanna Lynn. Thank you so much, Ms. Rouse and Ms. Nelson, for this conversation. I am not a student. I am actually a mentor, transplant from Chicago, and a AI founder as well. I'm a scientist and patent holder and former OSTP intern. I actually came up here to ask you if you could create a startup with the most impact over the next 5 to 10 years for the American public using AI, what would it be?
Gosh, what a question. I don't know that I have I don't know that I have a vivid entrepreneurial mindset. I think it would be around giving individuals the ability to know about tools and systems. Like, so what data is used, what is this tool, what data is it pulling on, what's the margin of error, to the extent that, around, the margin of error is not exactly the right phrase from dealing with an algorithmic system, but you know what I mean. Like, what are the sort of caveat emptors I should have about using this system versus that system? Just a kind of more public kind of infrastructure for, just the sort of AI ecosystem more generally that would trust that the public, may want to know and could know and would put some of the burden on me as a founder, I'm going to go there with you, to sort of create dashboards and tools and things that help the people, know. Because, we're only just going to have more data, more algorithms, more AI. Like, it's just going to get denser and more complicated. And it would be great to have a way to have the public just feel more empowered and more knowledgeable about what's happening. I mean, people often talk about it as AI literacy, as if like the public needs to, know what a transformer model is and have a degree in computer science. But I think, there's a way, I think part of what the Screen Actors Guild strike example shows us is that there's a way that people can understand the stakes for their lives and that we can communicate that to them. And so how do you do that at scale about all of the systems around us? What do you think of that? You're gonna
I think
are you gonna invest in my?
I would. Transparency and like data sovereignty is very important.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come back over here.
Hi, I just wanted to first thank you guys so much for spending time today. It was really informative, so thank you for coming out. My name is Helene Munson. I am a sophomore, comparable studies major with a minor in international studies and sociology from Panama. And my question is, with regards to racial discrimination, Congress, and just like people as a whole, whose role is it to really amend the flaws and abuses of AI? And also, do you think we're able to really coexist sustainably with AI in our status quo right now?
It's everybody's job. So it is the job of companies to, be responsible stewards of their technologies. It's the job of Congress. It's the job of consumers. I mean, you could not use these tools, or you could choose to make choices around, different chatbots based on whether or not they're responsible or we have choice here too. We have some kind of market-shaking power. Federal government. I mean, this is definitely in the administration. You call it a kind of whole of society response. It takes the whole of society to respond. There's a piece for all of us here.
Beautiful. And then, do you think we're able to really coexist with it, like at the end of the day, or
with AI?
With AI, just like giving it to.
I think one of the books I read recently is a book by my former Columbia colleague Dennis Tenen called "Literary Theory for Robots," and one of his arguments in this book is that we've been coexisting with technology for a very long time, and part of the challenge around AI is it's been so mystified, and that's why I often begin conversations by people by saying it's math, it's statistics, it's hardware, it's software. It is not something that we can't manage or get a handle on. We've done it before with other math, statistics, maybe not as sophisticated and as powerful as this, but we've been living with technologies and co-producing life and meaning with them for a very long time.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Hello, thank you again so much for this conversation. My name is Lauren Broussard. I'm a sociologist and anthropologist major in a minor in curatorial studies from Virginia. As Dr. Spence said, we live in a post-pandemic world, and my question is, do you feel that the pandemic and conversations around the vaccine and COVID-19 impacted the public's perception of AI, or do you think that would have happened regardless of the pandemic?
Interesting question. If you have an answer, I would love to hear it. I mean, I'm not sure that it influenced the public's perception of AI per se, but certainly the experience of the pandemic, I think, made science a more polarized and debated topic or terrain than I think it had been before publicly. So I think that means that you see it sort of playing out with AI, and you see it playing out with social media, which President Rouse invoked earlier. You know, this social media platform is conservative. This social media platform is too liberal. You know, so therefore I can't get the right information. So, you know, you saw that with you see it played out with. As well with, you know, a political figure in the campaign of, you know, of Robert Kennedy, which is, you know, making certain kinds of political claims around vaccines and whether or not the federal government and the Department of Health and Human Services should be engaged in certain kinds of scientific research and the like. And so I think it was just a high watermark for polarization around science and technology policy issues. That's probably not going away, and that now has become, I think, part of what you have to contend with as a policymaker, or just, you know, admit is there in the sort of space of trade-offs that you're thinking through.
Thank you.
I think also what the pandemic did is just accelerated our dependence on technology, or our use of technology in so many ways, because that's what got many of us through. Yeah. And so it's just more prevalent. Okay, I was given the 5-minute warning.
Thank you
so
very
what
much.
I'm going to do is I'm going to take all three. Exactly. So why don't we start over here and do those two, and then we'll come back to you.
Well, you know, thank you so much to the both of you. It brings me total joy to see you accomplished women speaking based on your expertise. I mean, it's great. So I'm Laurel Yancey. I mean this sincerely. And you know, my background's in communications, data privacy, and artificial intelligence. So the question is, I read your interview with the MIT, I think it's called the Science Policy Review. It was very insightful. So how do we, you know, as average citizens, how do we get involved in engaging with all that is going on? I know there were opportunities during previous administrations to get our involvement. So if you could update us with, based on where you find the environment now for citizen engagement with all these issues.
Hi, my question is similar. Oh, I think they're gonna do.
Yeah, we're doing all three.
Yeah. My name is Genevieve Joseph. I'm a graduating senior sociology and anthropology major from San Diego. So I love it. I know.
Go San Diego.
We gotta get a San Diego photo.
No, I love a nerdy black girl from San Diego. This is like my dream panel. But my question is very similar to kind of what's been asked about before, but from a young person's standpoint, we've been hearing a lot of like the future is AI.
Because ours is an old person standpoint, is that
younger? From the Generation Z standpoint, we've been hearing a lot that the future is AI, but is this like a career field that students should be considering, or ways to like get involved actively through the lens of like, do I need to shift my thesis topic? Things like that. I won't do it, but you know, considering things like that, so thank you.
I'm going to take, that is a great question, and last question.
Hi, my name is Sophia Abbey. I'm a second-year political science major, economics minor from San Jose, California. Yes. So I had a very specific question. So I'm asking, how do you think the broadening of new generative AI, like fintech, will change the way that the economy functions at a global level? So I'm thinking about, taking it to countries like Africa, or taking it to different continents in the world, and just asking that question of how do you think that's going to change the economic landscape, and what do you think more opportunities for social justice will come up with the new generative AI developing?
These are great questions. I'm hoping Cece can help with that third one. On the community, involvement, I think the Obama administration was really, I think, important in creating all of these different kind of platforms and portals and government. They started something called the Open Government Initiative, or Open OGP, Open Government Partnership, that sort of had sort of ideation challenges and prizes and just ways for the public to participate more broadly. And so certainly the work that we were doing at OSTP was building on that work. So we did an ideation challenge about how to expand access to the STEM fields, for example, something we did at OSTP. I know OSTP, since the time I left, has done, they've continued to use email addresses where the public can write to them about different kind of policy flows and policy streams. There's always, of course, the request for comment or the request for information, which, I think can be very alienating to the public. And I think that agencies are getting a lot better at trying to provide other kind of avenues for people to weigh in. So I think look for them. I don't think they're not there yet at a level where they're as easy to find as they should be, but I think quite a few agencies are creating different pathways for people to weigh in. Genevieve's question was about
the old.
I see. I can't even remember it. That's why I can't. That's to your point. Shifting careers.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't think
I'm going to
so.
jump in.
Yeah, you're a job.
It's a tool. So it is like, so when I was in high school, my dad said, when you graduate from high school, I'm going to get you a slide rule. And by the time I graduated, we got on to calculators.
Our dad's a physicist.
My dad's a physicist, right, exactly. So AI is a tool. And so I think absolutely you're going to need to be technologically savvy, because it is going to exist in almost any job that you may consider doing, but you should still find that which is really interesting and really brings meaning to your life. And you will use AI as it benefits you. I do think it will change the nature. Some jobs they're going to create that we haven't even thought of. Other jobs that exist today will go away, but that is the nature of a dynamic economy. So I would say, continue to follow what brings meaning to your life and what brings you a lot of passion. But AI and computer and technology, it's tools. Become savvy, but don't let that, I wouldn't go into it just to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. FinTech. I know there's concerns, like Senator Warner has legislation around trying to get regulations, financial regulations, after the introduction of generative AI. So there's some concerns about potential instability in financial markets, but I don't know, what would you say about?
This is also, we could do a whole nother evening or 6 on this. What I would say here is I actually want to refer to the work of my colleague, Nicol Turner-Lee. And when we think about broadening, and there is promise for using these kinds of digital currencies, fintech, all this kinds of AI, whatever we want to talk about technology, for helping in so many aspects of our societies and globally. But we also know there are places where they just don't have the technology. They don't have the broadband. They don't have the hardware. They don't have the software. And we have the potential, and there's serious potential to increase the divide. So there's great promise there, but there's also great peril. And I'm just going to suggest that you read Nicol's book on this. Okay. Well, I think. Okay. Am I wrapping it? Is she going to do the? Okay. I was going to wrap, but thank you. No, go ahead. I'll turn it over to you.
Wrap if you have something. All right, so Well, first of all, we want to thank you. This has been an incredible panel, and to have the two of you with your expertise is just absolutely wonderful. We have a reception over in Cosby Auditorium, and we also have the museum is open, and the exhibit, Ming Smith, absolutely fabulous photographer. Please go over. There's lots of food, but the exhibit is also spectacular. I also just want to recognize Amy Liu, who was the interim president of Brookings for almost a year, for 6 months, okay. But also it's kind of the brainchild behind this whole idea of thinking about election 24 and thinking about how to take things outside of Washington and the Beltway and really engage other audiences. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thanks for the great questions. And now we will go eat, drink, and be merry.
And come back tomorrow.
And yes, most importantly, come back tomorrow where there will be a full day exploring a lot of these things that we just had a chance to kind of touch the surface. And we have a lot of our panelists who will, speakers who will be here tomorrow. So please come back tomorrow for part 2. And again, thank you for this wonderful discussion.